Pravin, how's it going, man?
Yo,
I feel like we've never talked before. Like in actually, what the hell?
one time super briefly after White Lash, we had, but there was like a million people around back when you could be near people. And, I just like said my little piece and then was on my way. But yeah, you're right. This is funny. I'm used to this just being a text thing.
Yeah, wow. I guess this is like I know we should have had a topic in mind, and I know the protest obviously is a good topic to start with, but
Mhm.
I guess I just want to know about you too, because I know you're a playwright. You
Mhm.
are going for your master's. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just finished a master's program at CMU, which is an overwhelmingly white institution from the top down. Weird shift coming from UCSD, but I will say that their theater program has like a ton of talent and a ton of diversity, at least within the student body. And so yeah, I just finished my program there. I was like in the middle of my master's thesis when COVID hit, which was a bummer because it was going to be a play, right? And yeah, so it all shifted online. We still put something out there, but yeah, so I finished that, and yeah, so that is now done.
Congrats. That's
Thank
fantastic.
you. Yeah, I mean, it ended a little bit underwhelmingly, but I'm happy with what I wrote while I was there. I'm happy with what happened during my time there. Probably the most so far successful thing that I've written was a piece called Moreno, which centers like four fictional NFL players during 2016 who are all on the same team and kind of have to make these big decisions about their careers when Cap starts his protests, and they're all like, where do we fall in this? What are we going to do? Because I think something that got lost in the conversation was there were like hundreds of other NFL players who joined the protests, and then it all became this conversation just about Colin Kaepernick. But there were so many other people who were doing lobbying, who were doing like community engagement stuff, and really like stepping up to the plate during all this. To I guess mix my sports metaphors, but yeah, I mean, so that piece I wrote, it was an O'Neill finalist, so it got some attention and like a little bit of clout because of that. I mean, I'm really hoping that that does get it like some attention so that we can get it on stage, because I think right now like people really are revisiting the player protests, because it's like, oh shit, yeah, like the country is burning right now, and we really didn't listen to these people who really civilly tried to tell us. They've tried to fucking tell us. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Am I not allowed to swear? Sorry, that's
Well,
just
you
kind
can
of
swear all you want. Yeah.
okay.
And so are these real players that you chose? These five players that you focus on in the show?
No, so I mean, that was a tough call for me. I wanted to just make up some players, because I mean I figured like the real players are out there and you can look up their stories, and my hope is that by focusing on some players that I have made up, people afterwards will actually look into the real people.
Mm.
I didn't really feel comfortable like telling their stories, and I don't necessarily have the pull to interview enough people to feel like more comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're fictional players.
I honestly think low key that helps the theater people who don't watch sports because they don't have to know these people outside of the play. And I think
Right.
that might help them segue into actually looking up these players and learning more about those events that took place.
Yeah, because I think like for people who are interested in theater, like there is a lot of drama surrounding the player protests, even if they don't give a shit about the game of football.
Yeah.
Um, and I think athletes have always played a huge role in social movements in America, since sports are huge in America, and almost every major sport in America is dominated by Black people and people of color, and so it follows that athletes are very often on the cutting edge of these social movements. I mean, LeBron James, for example, Kobe before we lost him, R.I.P. I was just like rewatching this interview where Kobe is talking in 2018 about like who does he admire most, and he says Colin Kaepernick. It's a really great interview. But yeah, I mean, so often athletes are doing this kind of work, you know.
Mhm. And I think the tension is always there because usually the managers are racist. A lot of the a lot of the people at the top of these sports.
No doubt,
industries.
demonstrably racist. I mean, the now happily deceased owner of the Houston Texans literally about the player protests said we can't have the inmates running the prison, and I mean it's like there's a lot of layers to dissect there, right? I mean, I don't think we should necessarily look down on inmates, but to look at your players with that kind of attitude tells you a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a
And,
lot.
and yeah,
Go ahead.
that's by no means like an outlier position. I mean, look at like Jerry Jones, for example, who has been so outspoken against player protests. I mean, so many of these guys like have this extremely toxic mentality about their players. They don't really look at them like colleagues.
I was interested in, did you get into theater or sports first?
Sports. Yeah, I played football from 8th grade through high school. And I mean, I grew up a Charger fan. They're dead to me now because they moved to LA. But you know, sidebar, the Chargers head coach said he might give Cap a workout. I know might is, you know, but that's the one thing. That's the one thing besides moving back to San Diego that they could do to get me back on their side. But yeah, I mean, so I was into sports long before I was into theater. There wasn't really a theater program at my high school, and I didn't. I mean, I went to Patrick Henry in San Diego.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Now they actually do have a big theater building, which I thought was really cool. They were like drawing up the plans while I was there, but I never actually had any theater experience throughout K through 12. It was only in college that I was really exposed to theater, even as an art form at all. Like before college, I honestly thought theater was something nobody did anymore.
Interesting. That's actually that's really interesting because I know when you went to UCSD, you sort of took off with theater and started writing your own stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I took a playwriting class low key because I had this this dream of being a screenwriter, and that was a prereq for it. But then I was like, I really like the dialogue driven nature of theater, and I really also appreciate in a super. I mean, this is depressing in this COVID world, but in a really digital world, I appreciated the like actual bringing together of people for a theater event. I just really love the energy of actually performers being there with the audience. I love the potential for interactivity and the concept of like site specific shows was something that I also was super interested in because I think there's this gigantic elitist barrier to theater that is created by the largely white institution of American theater that, you know, partially due to its own faults, but partially due to the nature of it is very expensive to put up a theater production. And so you are in many ways cornered into charging high ticket prices if you actually want to function as a business, which you put that on top of a lot of layers of discrimination in America, and then most theater audiences are predominantly white. So that's why site specific was something that I was really interested in, and the idea of performing a piece not in a theater space. I saw a wonderful play called The Bitter Game, which was a one-man show performed on a basketball court. And I just thought like, oh my God, that is so democratizing. Like there are basketball courts in every neighborhood you can imagine. You conceivably could perform this show anywhere, right? And that concept was super cool to me. And that was something that, I never thought of before coming to UCSD, but the theater they're putting up there is honestly really, really fucking good. And yeah, it drew my attention. And yeah, I think there's in that form, there aren't that many, there aren't the same kinds of barriers that there are in like the movie industry, which, there's a ton of gatekeepers.
Right. Right. I think I was actually just talking to Christian Johnson, who also is still going to UCSD, I think, and we created Found Space there as a sort of a place where we could do site-specific shows and sort of, as you said, democratize the community of theater goers. And I think that's important in terms of a protest and also just a statement that you can do this anywhere. And it's almost, in a way, it's almost making like going back to some hip hop roots in a way, in terms of taking something and subverting it to actually be for the public or to democratize it again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wanted to get into because I know you're very passionate about hip hop. How do you, I guess you've included hip hop in some of your stuff, have you?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say that like hip hop and spoken word is a very consistent like feature of my work. Like for example, my master's thesis piece was called Bars, and it centers a spoken word poet / rapper who is also an activist. Mm. And so, yeah, I mean, I think hip hop really at its core, that's what it's about. Now that it's the biggest music industry in the world, there's obviously a large spectrum of what's included in hip hop. You still have these amazing activists like Talib Kweli, Brother Ali, Akua Naru. But then, of course, on the other side of the spectrum, you do have people that are using it mostly just to make a ton of money. And it's like, I don't fault them either, to be completely honest. That just is what it is. But yeah, I think sometimes the problem that you run into is these hip hop artists who have fashioned themselves as like leaders, when they really fumble that.
Yeah.
Like we saw with J. Cole's song that was like 15 bars about how No Name should have, said what she was trying to say a little nicer. Literally, he has a line that is about her tone, and it was like, and yeah, then the last bar is like, oh, maybe I'm not doing enough. It's like, bro, if you think you're not doing enough, then you could have spent the whole ass song talking about that and talking about what you think you can do. And I mean, that's not to say J. Cole isn't also doing good things. I mean, he's been at these protests, right? But yeah, I mean, it just hurts to see such a shitty take from someone that I do look up to in a lot of ways.
Exactly. And I think the people that are fervently supporting him, saying he didn't say anything, he didn't mention No Name by name, but he did on Twitter the next day. And then it became this whole thing where a ton of his fans started to attack her for calling him out, even though she never really called him out. And it became, my biggest issue is that it became just a diversion from the movement. And I was frustrated because I was diverted as well, as I feel like a lot of them were, in that I think it came out in the evening at some point. At least that's when I listened to it. And then the next day was spent discussing this with people out online. I mean, granted, I don't think everyone does that. In terms of the internet, like, you want to at least make that perspective known so that all these people aren't just shitting on No Name for no reason.
And yeah, I mean, I think it's tough sometimes to have a nuanced conversation about these things because, on one side you have people who are like, all right, J. Cole's done. We're done with him. We don't want to hear anything from him. And then on the other side, you have people who are like, oh, like that track was actually super good. And it's like, there is an in-between somewhere where we can say we still appreciate a lot of the things that J. Cole has said. We still can criticize a lot of the things that J. Cole has said, but like, can't we agree that, like you said, this was a diversion? It took away our attention and it's like, look, I get it. The whole creative beef thing to create publicity for yourself and ultimately for the other artists that you're beefing with, it's almost always good for both artists, right? Like that's the the open secret, right? Is that it's like, oh, like so and so fucked up so and so, but like really at the end of the day, the beef is good for everyone, right? But it's not good in this circumstance. Like this wasn't the right time to go to that place of hip hop. Like a hip hop beef is great when like nothing has happened in 2 weeks and everyone's really fucking bored and you're just like, oh, here's my chance to get some ats on social media.
Yeah.
This is not the time for that kind of thing, you know? It's like this is the time for there to be unity among activists and artists. And you know, even if we have to have some difficult conversations within the community, I think the piece missed the mark on that. But yeah, I mean, I do think that hip hop is super central as an activist form, as a it can be anti-capitalist, although in many ways hip hop is super capitalist. But yeah,
I was really interested in Ab-Soul's music, especially like talking about Huey and just sort of black. I think Kendrick Lamar, like a lot of artists are talking about things that I think are anti-capitalist, anti-police. And so it's honestly something that I get really excited about in terms of like looking for new artists. Like No Name, I didn't even know she was like considered political when I heard her first album. She wasn't overtly. So I think I honestly just like finding new rappers. And like who came out with new music recently? Wale came out with like this political album that was pretty sick. Even Lil Baby, Run the Jewels. Did you listen to that?
Oh, Yo, Killer Mike is the fucking man. Love Killer Mike.
Yes, man. Like, there's some good ass music out there, and I feel like hip hop is definitely like the best. Like, it's super profitable, but I do wish there was even more focus on political stuff. I think sometimes it just there are distractions, but I guess to each their own.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, considering like you just said like you wish there was more political stuff. It made me think of 21 Savage, right? Because 21 Savage is not considered like a political rapper, but then there was when he released that like extended version of A Lot, and he like performed it on I forget, some late night show, and he mentions Flint, Michigan, and he mentions the kids in fucking cages, right? And then what, like a couple weeks after, it was like he was about to get like potentially deported, right? So really, what does that show you? That shows you that the government would prefer rappers stay in their apolitical lane.
Yes.
Right? Like they would prefer 21 Savage just continued rapping about whatever the fuck he wants to rap about than talking about the shit that the government is doing. Because all of a sudden it was like, hey, by the way, 21 Savage, we know that you're an illegal immigrant. And it was like, so yeah, I mean, I think it goes to show that the government knows the power that hip hop has to influence politics. If they're willing to lash out that quickly, simply because of like 2 bars in a song.
And my favorite thing is seeing like other countries that hip hop isn't as big as it is here, but they realize that it's a protest, and so. If you see, there's a ton of like countries that have been using hip hop recently in recent I guess like civil unrest. I think my favorite, man, I think I keep going back to NWA and like Fuck the Police and how fucking badass that was at the time. It's crazy that it's just crazy how hip hop, it ultimately was propped up to some extent by wealthy people who like brought it into the mainstream. But I think there's that constant tension, and it's similar to sports. I think that constant tension of the people that are really fucking good rappers generally care about this shit because they're from areas that have been ravaged by capitalism. So
Right.
they're fighting back against these people who want hip hop or want sports to be apolitical to appease the general American public.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're you're totally spot on with that comparison, because it's like sports has the Kaepernicks and it also has the OJs, right? You know, and same goes for hip hop. I think once there is all of that money in an industry, then it kind of opens it up for there to be just as much regressive as progressive potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes into theater as well. But although I think theater is definitely it's still pretty fucking elitist. Like, there's no, I don't know, man. Like, what on Broadway is the most progressive show? I don't even know.
Yeah, see, honestly, I'm not even tuned into what's on Broadway for kind of that exact reason. But I mean, I will say that Jeremy O. Harris, for example, is one playwright who I would say is bringing some really interesting work about like racial politics and just centering issues of race that are largely eschewed from maybe more mainstream theater and bringing it like to Broadway or at the very least off Broadway.
Mm.
See, I mean, I do think there is a movement of young Black and brown theater artists who are trying to maybe more mainstream this kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that in theater there's a deeply what's the word I'm looking for? It's like it can be deeply escapist, where again at its best it is directly engaging with what's going on. Like one play, for example, that I read during my time as an undergrad was called Waiting for Lefty. It was an Odette's play, and it was like it was like a socialist pro-worker propaganda piece that was meant to like be performed in the streets, like at union gatherings. And I was like, that's some lit shit right there. Like, this is literally like it is designed to not just reflect upon, but actively contribute to a political moment and a political movement. And I do think that is like theater at its best, is doing that. It's not just commenting, it is engaging.
Mm. How are you when it comes to like, like people that are apolitical and just don't discuss politics? I have a really bad time like interacting with them. Like I get really introverted and I don't say shit. Like, I just change as a human being. Weird. And that happens to me in some theater spaces that I go into. I'm like, I still bring my shit when it comes to theater, but like, I honestly don't have a lot of people. Like, if I have coworkers that are apolitical, I generally just don't share that much with them. Do you?
Yeah, I mean,
are you kind of more bold? I'm bold online, but in person, honestly, I'm not.
It's tough because on one hand, like when people say some dumbass shit, let me be completely fucking honest, like I'm just not a political person, I kind of want to just fucking shake them and be like, you are a political person. Everyone is a political person. Nobody is safe from politics. Everything is political, whether you like it or not. But I mean, if I wanted to try to be more diplomatic, what I think I would say to someone who is saying like, I just try not to get involved in politics, is like, I understand that it can be stressful, and I understand that politics can often bring out the angriest parts of people, but we need to accept that anger comes out in politics because it matters so much to so many people. Because a lot of people, it's not just about having a conversation or winning an argument. It is about their livelihood, and it is about continuing to thrive in this world and in this country. And so really, when somebody says they're not political, that kind of it hurts me, because you have to be in a place of privilege to say something like that.
Right.
Because really what it means, what you're saying when you're saying that you're not political, everyone's political, right? What you're actually saying is that you have the privilege to not have to pay attention or engage with politics because you know that the system that is currently in place is doing a relatively good job at protecting the rights that you care about for yourself.
Yeah.
That's really.
I think also there's people that just are ahistoric in terms of they don't quite understand history and they don't have an emotional attachment to it. So even like, I think it often does come from a place of privilege, but there's also those like poor Trump supporters like that you really should not be. I think most people should not be a Trump supporter. Only if you're in the 1% does it really benefit you. But
right.
But
yeah, I mean, anyone who's a Trump supporter is political, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think.
But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. If we want to go into the psychology of why people are supporting Trump when he's so clearly not like materially supporting them, I think that again, we have to dissect the many ways that the not so left-wing Democratic Party has failed people. Because you know, there are a lot of poor white people in America who look at the Democratic Party and see a bunch of elites who don't give a shit about them, and that's not false, right? So when somebody like Trump is saying, hey, you're my people, I care about you, that's a very powerful message. And I think those of us who are vehemently anti-Trump, we can get caught up on the like, oh, but how could you possibly support somebody who is so explicitly racist? And I think that's a valid question, but nonetheless, for a lot of people, it's about feeling like you have someone who's fighting for you. Right. And as long as the Democratic Party is so clearly failing to prove or even attempt to appear that they are fighting for poor people in America, you're going to have a lot of people who are supporting Republicans because the Republicans have all these cultural appeals that are so successful.
I think what I was thinking about earlier that was kind of making me sad was my parents were involved in a lot more just cultural things than I am. And I guess like that passing of like culture didn't quite pass on to me. And I feel like with my kids, it won't be passed on as much. I feel like we often look to like music or movies that have been sort of like created with these political intentions, either subconsciously or like consciously. And I think when we get into like these political discussions of like Democrat or Republican, it's very not cultural. It's more of like an identity that we've been given, if that makes sense. It's like we're given this identity, and so we play that role. But I wish there was more of and I think there's a lot of places that still continues this culture and community of information that's passed on between families and between neighbors and friends. But at least in my family, growing up where we were, we didn't have that like cultural tie. So I had to go out and find it. And I feel like that's something our generation does a lot, is they go and find their identity outside of themselves, if that kind of makes sense. I'm sure that's scary for that, but I feel like it causes people to almost be detached from the politics that they say they support. And that might have to do with privilege as well.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm just digesting that. I don't have a lot to respond to that with.
Yeah. No, that's good. I think like, I don't know. I think in terms of like thinking about just the Black Panthers, right? And how basically like the FBI kind of like, they either tried to get them out of the country, killed, or just like ended as a organization entirely. I feel like that was like an ultimate cultural revolution for people that started to like take up arms. Like they were like, all right, the Second Amendment, we're going to take up arms to defend ourselves. We're going to start distributing pamphlets, like talking about, our politics, but it's stamped out because that's not desirable. Like that sort of,
and it's so amazing how like the Black Panthers put to work an agenda that conservative gun lovers only fantasize about, right?
Yeah.
Like so many like very pro-gun people are like, I have my guns so that in the case that a tyrannical government is taking my rights, I can stand up against it. And it's like, so you support the Black Panthers, right? Because that is exactly to a T what they did. And so yeah, it is amazing how some quote unquote principles are so quickly thrown out the window when all of a sudden people of color, or Black people more specifically in this case, decide to use those ideologies or act on those principles. Because yeah, I mean, I think it's also interesting when we're talking about culture, right? If you bring up the Black Panthers in so many circles in America, you know, a lot of white conservatives view the Black Panthers as like the left-wing KKK. And
Yeah.
it's so incredible to me how that has seeped into uh, just average everyday thinking about these topics. And I think it's because we don't educate people about the Black Panthers at all. I mean, I read Assata Shakur's autobiography in college, and that was pretty life-changing. I'm in the middle right now of Huey Newton's autobiography, Revolutionary Suicide. And yeah, I mean, reading these books, it's like no, like there's no comparison, there's no equivalence to be made there. Yeah. You know, these are people who had a very clear vision for the uplift of Black people, and somehow the uplift of Black people gets equated with like Black supremacy, as though that is somehow a danger in a country that is so dominated by whiteness.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. That's wild. Like how even Black Lives Matter, especially like starting with the Ferguson protests, how it suddenly became this whole all lives matter like response to whenever someone said Black Lives Matter. That's it's the whiteness of this country is honestly kind of overwhelming. Like they overwhelm the narrative every single time.
And it's sad. It's sad because it's like, yeah, I think Black Lives Matter is actually the perfect instance to consider, right? Because like, what was the thought behind that phrase, right? It was, we want to say something that should be totally non-controversial, right? Nobody should fucking disagree that Black lives matter. I mean, Michael Che has an amazing stand-up bit on this, where it's like, that's where we started negotiations. Matters. Fucking matters. Like, and so yeah, the thought was, okay, here we have this, what should be so non-controversial. Black lives matter, right? And so yeah, the overwhelmingness of like the white reactionary forces in America was on full display there, because it was like somehow that got twisted for so many people in America to, oh, Black lives are the only lives that matter. And it's like, A, nobody said that. And B, do we really think we are that close to that version of America? Do we honestly think that? Yeah. And that's a real, actually, I asked that question honestly, because it's like, there is this spearheaded by like conservative radio hosts largely, this ideology of like, white people are under attack in America. Yeah. You know? And I think it again comes from this sense of like, when you come from a place of privilege, any attempt by any other group to achieve the level of privilege that you have will to you look like they're trying to take your rights.
Right.
Because yeah, it's like yeah, of course there have been plenty of good memes lately that have delved into this of like, wait, so if all lives matter, then Black lives matter, right? So why are you disagreeing with that phrase with this, squares and fucking rectangles? They can both be true, right?
Yeah.
Like, one doesn't mean it's not the other.
Yeah. I was wondering what is your take on social media in terms of either spreading these far right like conspiracy theories or like activism in general? Because there's a lot of talk right now that Twitter is toxic because it cancels people quite quickly. But do you think that that rapid like dissemination of information is vital to this current movement, or do you think it actually disorients it?
Well, that's a really good question. I think when we're thinking about the political effects of social media, it really does just like speed up everything to where there's no hang time between you know an explosive political event and that event touching every city in America. Like it was 2 days after George Floyd was murdered that in Pittsburgh there was an enormous protest, right? And I think that's only possible because of social media. And so I think in a way it's actually just it's hard to quantify in terms of like good and bad, but I think I would actually make the argument that it's good because it makes the whole country deal with the problems that occur in like a specific microcosm. Like we are all so connected, and whether that means that far right groups are able to more quickly spread hate and more quickly spread these violent responses, it also means that left-wing movements and movements that are centered around the uplift of people are able to balloon all across the country with extreme speed. I mean, so I do, but to round back, I think to the question about cancel culture, yeah, I think it's kind of sad that we are so ready to tear people down when they make a misstep.
Yeah.
I think at a certain point, like when people who have made a terrible mistake keep doubling down, there should be a point that we're like, yeah, all right, fuck this person. But
Yeah.
but like I mean, like for example, Doja Cat, super problematic things that she has done and said in the past. But when I look at what has happened with Doja Cat, it makes me sad for her because I'm like, this seems like a person who has internalized so much self-hate, really, and is working through that, but is working through that in a place where all of a sudden it's a public thing and not a personal thing,
Yeah. What happened? I saw her name trending for a while, but it's hard to keep up with it all.
Yeah, for real. I mean, I don't have a super in-depth knowledge of all of the various things, but she had some song that was titled, I forget what the title was, but it is like this word that is used in far right circles to denigrate Black people who have been abused by the police or murdered by the police. So there's this song that like way in her past had this title, and then also she was found to have been in a lot of like right-wing chat rooms, just like chatting with people.
Yeah.
And like kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like I don't know, just doing what they want and saying things that they want to hear. And yeah, so I mean, I think it's like, it was kind of shocking. It was like, oh, like we do need to rethink who this person is and whether or not we want to say that, oh, we stan this person, da da da. But I think, she's so fucking young, and for us all, for the internet to collectively just be like, all right, screw Doja Cat, we're totally done with her. To me, that it makes me sad because like we're so ready to tear people down, and we are so reluctant to help people grow in these online formats. Because I mean, even for me, and probably for you too, it's like the internet brings out the angry or the oftentimes the negative in us, right? Because it's easy to talk shit and say, you know, mean things to people when you're not looking at them, and when you have this almost like shield of the internet.
Yeah.
And it's easy to judge on the internet, especially when it comes to celebrities who are living in the spotlight, and none of us are, right? So we're just sitting back here, and it's like, I mean, shit, until I'm famous and someone dissects all this shit, like, you know what I mean? Like, we have the benefit of just being able to sit back and be like, oh, this person so fucked up, all that stuff that they did. They're canceled, right? I mean, I think you're well within your right to like not buy someone's music if you're completely offended by something they say. But the like organized, like, okay, we're going to spam their social media with a bunch of like
emojis.
Okay, well, no, that's different. That's,
I'm just kidding.
that's a different conversation.
Yeah, I know.
I'm dead about that. No, but yeah, like to spam somebody's social media with like insults because they have done something or said something problematic. I don't know. I just don't think that that's healthy, you know, and I do think social media opens the door for us to be worse versions of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I think progressives, or not even just progressives, I think a lot of maybe even young people who focus on mental health seem to neglect the aspect of mental health if they're targeting, if it's like a whole swath of like thousands of people targeting one person to cancel them. I can't imagine how that feels for that person. That it's almost like an angry mob, and it reminds me of like back in the day when people were like tarred and feathered and shit, and just like their emotions are totally like taking control of them. And I honestly don't know if there's a solution to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just like, as people who want to consider ourselves progressives, like, we just need to do our best to maybe rein in ourselves when we're dealing with people on the internet, because it's like yeah, like when someone like Doja, for example, not to harp on this point, but it's just a recent thing, when she's receiving all of this anger, it's hard to grow in that context. And I think what we really want to see is people become better. And so a lot of times when there is this like barrage of anger directed at a person, they get worse. They double down. Like, I mean, it's like the Kanye effect. It's like sometimes they thrive off of the negative attention, but and then they just double down on the problematic things that they've been doing or saying, which is the opposite of what we should want.
Yeah, I mean, poor Kanye too. I feel like some of that negative attention kind of fucked him up a bit. Low key, like, I feel like
exactly. And he's such a good example too, if we're bringing the concept of mental health into this, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because he talks about being bipolar, and the thing is, if he goes out there and says something when he's in the heat of the moment, and that gets taken and just pushed everywhere, everyone's like, "Fuck Kanye, cancel him," which has happened how many times? Like, I don't even know if that has happened to that guy.
Yeah, well, you can't really cancel Kanye, to be completely honest. Like, he's an institution at this point. Like, you can love him, you can hate him, but he's there. Like,
yeah, and I think I just think a lot of that's sort of American culture. Like, even Donald Trump, he loves the negative attention. He loves, like, everything he posts is kind of like calling for that.
That makes me think of a despicable man who said an absolutely astoundingly on point thing. Roger Stone, right? I watched this documentary on Netflix called Get Me Roger Stone, right? And at the end of it, he said, it's at some point, he says this amazing line where he's like, "If you hate me, good. I revel in your hatred because you wouldn't hate me if I wasn't effective." And I was just like, wow. Like, I do hate you, and I see how that actually feeds you. And that's so brutal, because it's like, yeah, how do you deal with someone like Trump, who every time that any mainstream media source says, oh, look how bad what Donald Trump said is, really all they're doing is giving him one more platform for his words to be released to.
Yeah. Any press is good press. And haters almost tend to talk about the person more than the fans do. So, yeah, our culture is weird, man. I feel like celebrity worship in general, or anti-worship, like celebrity hate and celebrity worship, is such a weird ass, almost unnatural thing. It's just, it's bizarre.
Yeah, it is. It almost feels like our version of like British obsession with the royal family.
Yeah.
It's like why?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I get like I get putting these people on some kind of pedestal just because they're so talented at a certain thing, but then I don't understand why we feel like we need to care about every aspect of their lives, maybe. But
Yeah.
but some celebrities, the point of what they do is to like draw attention to themselves, and I think a lot of celebrities actually thrive in that environment.
Yeah, I think it's almost been brought down to the individual level with Instagram, and I guess all of social media, but it seems like everyone these days tries to create a brand, and it's kind of interesting. It's cool. It's actually cool. That's
Yeah,
the
it almost says like democratized brand making, like we all are our personal brand on the internet, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I feel like there's some people that don't use social media at all, and I honestly applaud them because I don't know what life is like without it anymore. That sounds
Yeah, that's
bad on my part, maybe, but I mean,
no,
morning rituals, I go on and I scroll for a little bit, like when I wake up, pretty much. You know, I think a lot of people do that too, and it's like those people who don't, I think they're kind of lucky. Maybe that's an obsession or a sin that they're not a part of.
yeah, it is interesting to me to consider, like, because I think so much like for people who are actively engaged in social media, like so much of your social interaction, your news consumption, your just just general consumption of images is done on social media. And
Yes.
so you're actually like living a lot of your life on these platforms.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild, man. Like we don't have that much. Well, we have a substantial amount of time to live, I think, generally, but so much of it is like online now, and it's like I pissed someone off. I forget where it was, but someone called me like an armchair activist, and I was like, oh, shit, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I like that's so funny to me in this world because it's like there's actually so much activism you can do on social media.
Yeah.
And so this idea that it's like that being active on social media and putting your opinions out there on social media is like lazy activism. I mean, on one hand, I do think we need to back the shit that we say up with real action when it comes to what we do with our lives and what we do in the streets. But it's just funny to me because you actually can get so much done on social media. Like, for example, there's an amazing book I've been reading called "Nonviolence Ain't What It Used to Be,"
Mm.
and it's an incredible book by this dude named Sean McFessel. And I've been super interested as like I'm reading this book and it's commenting. I mean, it's from a couple years ago, but it's commenting so directly on the conversations that we're having right now about what nonviolence even means in America.
Yeah.
And I've been like posting, little paragraphs from it on my Instagram, and there have been like dozens of people who are like, "What is this book?" And among those dozens of people, I hope at least a couple have read it, but or ordered it or something. But it's like, you can get so much done in terms of conversation with people about important topics, like spreading important information. Like I now am following on Facebook a local activist group in Pittsburgh that has been organizing protests here. And now I just know so much more about what's happening every day when it comes to activist organization in Pittsburgh. And so it's like this idea that being an activist on social media is for wannabes is total bullshit. Like it's complete bullshit. Like so much activism happens on social media. I mean, fucking K-pop stars and TikTok folk absolutely wrecked Trump's rally. Like you can get so much done on social media. Like you really can. I think a lot of it comes from this like resentment of a generation that feels like they don't understand social media. And a lot of it comes from people who really are just reactionaries who don't like to see any activist action and just kind of want to shit on you.
Totally. I think to wrap it up with that statement, is there anyone that can, like, anywhere people can find you on? Is your Twitter open to the public, or?
So I don't have a Twitter, but I post on Facebook. That's like my most active social media form. I post on Facebook a lot. Most of my posts are public. But yeah, if anyone wants to give me a follow to just see what kind of, perspectives I'm putting out there and stuff that I'm sharing, Pravin Wilkins on Facebook. Twitter is a water that I have yet to wade into, although I understand that perhaps I should.
Yeah. And yeah, I'll put it in the video bio. I want to thank you for coming on the show and just chatting about whatever.
Totally.
It was cool.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate your voice out there, even if sometimes we go a little back and forth.
Yeah, and if we ever have another disagreement, I'd love to bring you back on the show. We can disagree face to face. Might be more.
Yeah. we might get a little more mileage out of that than in the comment section.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. You take care.
Absolutely. I appreciate you, man.
Have a good night. You too, man.
Deuces.